Welcome everyone, Costin here with a discussion about Total War Warhammer 3 Immortal Empires and about some of the worst campaigns currently in the game, especially for Legendary difficulty, though many of the things that I'm going to be talking about in this video can apply on lower difficulties as well. Now I do wish to make 2 points before I begin with the list. One, this is not about how hard the campaign is. A campaign can be very difficult and be very good. A campaign being very easy and just being a steamroll isn't a fun experience, to be quite honest about it. There's things like starting positions being a problem, races being a problem, territorial availability being a problem. Like, it's not fun playing a campaign and you just find yourself in a situation where you can't expand because there's no territory that's suitable for the legendary lord that you're playing. And there's certainly good legendary lords that can have fun campaigns that do suffer from that situation. The second thing I want to mention is that I am not at all considering the Demons of Chaos for this list or any other list in the future. As far as I'm concerned right now with the Demons of Chaos, they're really badly designed, badly balanced, badly handled by Creative Assembly. They all need a rework. With the exception of Scarbrand and to an extent Nakari, they're pretty terrible on numerous levels. I mean, Kairos isn't great, Kugath isn't great, and Demon Prince is a joke of action. So I'm no longer going to consider the Demons of Chaos for any videos that I'm doing in the future, with the exception of perhaps Scarbrand and maybe Nakari. But even then, that's pushing it as far as I'm seeing it. But anyway, let's begin. Number 5, we have Louen Leoncoeur, a legendary lord with some decent faction-wide benefits, specifically the campaign movement range, good amount of power in combat, and a really horrible starting position, as well as a faction that just currently doesn't work very well right now in Immortal Empires, especially not when you have a lot of siege battles, which he does in his campaign. So let's talk about Louen Leoncoeur and his problems. So he does have a decent starting army, including 5 cavalry units, 3 of which are pretty decent, 2 of which not so much, but still a pretty decent starting army that can, in an open field battle, beat pretty much everyone around him, with the exception of Be'lakor. But I'll get into that in just a second. Then he has some pretty decent lord effects, as well as all the vows unlocked from the very start of his campaign, as well as being able to get 2 pretty decent items from quests. That's where it ends. That's where the good part ends. Bretonnia is not that great of a faction currently in the game. The only real benefit, army-wise, they have early on is the fact they can get artillery that's really good against walls early on through the carpenter's workshop. So they can get trebuchets. Though you don't start with any trebuchets, so first you need to get Couronne to tier 2. You should also get the field, so you can get archers. You take down this army over here of Musalan, you reclaim this territory, then you go for the greenskins. That will be what you do for the first few turns. But then you encounter the many issues that Louen Leoncoeur has in his campaign. Now, in terms of like mid-game, late-game potential, Bretonnia can be great for Bretonian factions because there's a lot of provincial capitals. There's a lot of 2-region provinces, but for Bretonnia, that's not necessarily a downside because Bretonnia wants to get settlements to a higher level, to tier 4, tier 5, to get all their benefits. Like, they want to get armories at tier 4, they want to get recruitment structures for infantry at tier 4 for the foot squires, though it's kind of annoying having to get the tier 4 rally field barracks chain just to get foot squires, which are just decent infantry and not even that great infantry, but still, or tier 5 to get all the cavalry units. By the way, Bretonnia can benefit quite a lot from having a lot of provinces, even if they're only 2-region provinces. So Bretonnia as an area of the campaign can be good for them in the long term. In the short term, however, this is a pain in the neck because you're not good in sieges. Your infantry is not good, your ranged units are not great, and cavalry, yeah, your cavalry is some of the best in the entire game, but it's ineffective in siege battles. And you don't start with any siege yourself. You have to get your settlement to tier 2. Though, to be fair, by the time you've dealt with the greenskins here and turned around, you should be able to recruit artillery over here. But then you encounter another issue. You can go to war with your fellow Bretonnian factions, but if you're trying to confederate them, which honestly you should be able to, you don't have that option. If you're playing Louen Leoncoeur, in order to be able to confederate with these factions, you need to research it. Now, the research for every faction takes 4 turns. And you've got other things to do with your research than bothering to just get to do a research just to allow you the option of confederating with the faction. You're probably better off just declaring war on these factions and taking them out. Though, of course, that will create its own issues, and it just doesn't feel appropriate for the King of Bretonnia to go to war with Bretonnian factions for their territory. I think that does display the limitations. Besides, when it comes to research, you're much better off working to get water pumps as quickly as possible, or really to get diplomatic relations with Rapans, because you're probably going to want to get Rapans very quickly. So those are some of the things that you might consider doing in your campaign.
You seek the lady's favor.
Which means you're going to have to go to war with these factions and take their territory. It's going to be a lot of sieges. You're going to be worse off for it. That's just one of the problems, the many problems. So it's bad gameplay. It's frustrating gameplay. It doesn't work well with the army you have. But it gets even worse. See, the problem is you have limited territory that you can take. Like, you can conquer the Empire if you want to go completely against the lore. But the problem is the amount of territory you can take is going to be limited. And the problem is you're going to be moving south. So you start in Couronne, you're going to be moving south. Let's say you conquer everything in Artois, in Lyonesse, you take out Kemmler. Not too bad. Here's the issue that you then encounter. You encounter Grom. And Grom is one of the most powerful legendary lords in the game. Now, he has a lot of enemies in his campaign, but you're encountering one of the more powerful legendary lords in the game in the south, while in the north, you've got another one that's also really powerful, who is almost certainly going to declare war on you. In fact, I don't think I've played any campaign in this game where Bellecourt and Louen Leoncoeur didn't end up at war with each other. It's just something that happens because they're pretty close to each other. I mean, I guess France and Britain declaring war on each other is fairly appropriate, but all the same, you've got the major threat to the north. You could wipe it out, but you can't really take the territory to the north. And it's not the only threat. You've got Wulfric, you've got Norscan factions that are going to pose a threat, and you can't take their territory. You need to expand south to capture the territory you need, but at the same time, you're constantly being threatened from the north. And even when you take the south, you then encounter the entirety of Athel-Loren and Ekekla. So not really a great campaign. It can be a great deal of frustration. You don't necessarily have the tools to deal with it. And therein lies the problem. It's one thing to have a challenging campaign as long as you have the tools to properly deal with it, but Bretonnia is just ill-suited for the kind of campaign they're given here. And on top of that, Louen Leoncoeur in particular, because he doesn't start with artillery. Like, if he started with at least one artillery piece, he'd be in much better position. He used to start with artillery, by the way. In Warhammer 2, I believe he had 2 artillery units. He had a pretty powerful starting army. Now it's like, oh, let's just nerf him into the ground, when he desperately still needs that powerful army to deal with all the issues he does have in his campaign. So not the great starting situation. And look, I could have easily put Karl Franz in this position, but the reason I didn't do so is for all the issues the Empire has, especially in the early game, at least the Empire has late game potential. The problem with Bretonnia in particular is that their late game potential is not that great. I mean, yes, their cavalry is amazing and all that, their economy is good, and they do have good siege, but they just don't have a really effective army to deal with siege battles. That's the problem. That's the fundamental problem that Bretonnia has right now, and Louen Leoncoeur represents it the best of all the Bretonnian factions. Number 4, we have Archaon the Everchosen. Yes, a very powerful legendary lord, a very powerful faction, and it's boring as dirt. And that's why it's on this list. Just because a faction is hard doesn't mean it's bad. And just because a faction, a campaign can be easy doesn't mean it's good. Archaon's campaign is a cakewalk from the very beginning. He does have a decent enough fight, I suppose, early here with an Exalted Keeper Secrets. He wins this fight very easily, or he can even ignore this fight. Like, you can just take your entire army over here, go for the fortress on this side, ignoring the army you're supposed to fight. Auto-resolve this, take it over, occupy and vassalize it, and then turn around, smash and bring a Hell Cannon, Swords of Chaos, as well as recruitment. That Keeper of Secrets is not going to be able to stand up to you if it does decide to stick around. That's just... And that's one of the few challenges you actually have in this campaign. The only other challenge is potentially Boris Ursus, who does have a pretty powerful starting army. He does have good casualty replenishment. He's going to throw a full stack at you. But you're far more powerful. You're going to be able to throw a lot more at him than he will be able to at you. Now, the only challenge beyond that for Archaon's campaign is trying to keep as many factions alive so he can literally vassalize them. It's not beating them that's the problem. It's literally just the vassalization process because he has like every minor demonic faction around him. Like, it would be great if he could vassalize them because you get significant bonuses for every vassal. You can confederate other legendary lords of chaos. So if you go over here and you can get Kolic. You can then get Village. If you go west, you can get Sigvald, Be'lakor, all that, Azazel. And you're basically playing an unstoppable horde from the very beginning until the end. And I think a lot of people are in the same boat where we like the mechanics of the Warriors of Chaos. We like the upgrade system, not necessarily the recruitment system, but we do like the Warband upgrade system. We have we like the way the vassal system, the Arc Fortress works, but Warriors of Chaos are just so far ahead of everyone else. It's not even funny to play their campaigns. Like, the enjoyment that you could have playing a Warriors of Chaos campaign has evaporated for a significant number of people. It's just too easy. It's a cakewalk. You're never under threat. You're never under risk of losing. And even if you lose your entire army, sure, it might take you a couple of turns to recruit things because of the Warband recruitment limitations, but you're never really under threat of losing anything. Ever, at any point. This Dark Fortress, it will never be attacked in the entire campaign. It will never be under threat. You're never going to run out of money. Your vassals will do a lot of the fighting for you. And it gets to a ridiculous level. I mean, consider Boris. He's a powerful legendary lord. You can vassalize him. Consider Grimgor. I was considering putting Kolic on the list here, but Archaon is just too ridiculous. I mean, Kolic can be much better early game, in the very, very early game, because he can vassalize Grimgor faster than Archaon, whereas Archaon was going to have to fight Grimgor. But once you do defeat Grimgor and force vassalization on him, congrats, you have one of the most powerful combatants in the entire freaking game that generally conquers a significant portion of the map as your vassal. And you can let him loose, and he'll be just as potent even as your vassal. In fact, even more so. He'll be even more so because you can feed him territory money and take control of his troops to capture critical territories. And so Grimgor just becomes even more unstoppable as your vassal. And then you just continue vassalizing other factions. No one can stop you. You could set the endgame crisis at turn 10. The only thing that would do would be a speed bump because of Grimgor, potentially, if you do that as the ultimate endgame crisis. That is all. That's the situation of Warriors of Chaos. It's a very easy campaign. There's a lot of good mechanics, but it is just really boring at the moment. And that's where things stand with Warriors of Chaos as a whole. I include every single Warriors of Chaos Legendary Lord on the spot on this list. Not a great campaign right now. And it's an interesting perspective, though, because it's not because the faction is bad. It's not because the Legendary Lords are bad. It's not because their starting positions are bad. It's because they're way too damn powerful. Now, how would you nerf them without breaking the fancy new mechanics that Creative Assembly introduced? Well, I don't think the solution is necessarily nerfing them. I think other factions just need significant improvements to AI and all that, but I would certainly not argue in favor of nerfing Warriors of Chaos, especially if they're going to do something as annoying as limit your recruitment or your economy. That would just be really frustrating if they did that. No, I think that they're just a more advanced faction than or a more advanced race than the opposition, and it's really showing how outdated a lot of races are. In particular, the problem lies with the Empire. Really, the Empire is just a pathetic faction right now. Kislev is not well designed as a faction either. The demons are not well designed. The dwarves are horrible. I mean, this is the problem. The Warriors of Chaos are so dominant because the factions they're generally fighting just can't keep up with them. The Empire can't keep up. The dwarves can't keep up. The ogres, if you're playing as Kolic, are no match for him. So there's a lot of issues when it comes down to that. Number 3, we have Cylostra Direfin of the Vampire Coast. The Vampire Coast is not really a great faction in the game at the moment. I mean, they have power, they have artillery that they can get, but they're limited by 2 things. One is the fact that a lot of the units that they do have are units with very low armor and low leadership, which means that you'll take significant casualties in any auto-resolve situation, and you may play a campaign as the Vampire Coast where you win every single battle if you fight them manually, but you might lose auto-resolve situations against settlement garrisons. And let me be blunt about that. Being in that situation is not great. You could consider Skaven also being in the same boat when it comes to this, like Ikit Claw in particular. Another issue, and this is similar to Ikit Claw, like I could have easily put Ikit Claw in this position because, oh, Ikit Claw is really powerful. He is. So is the Vampire Coast. The problem is that they're powerful because they have gunpowder units, right? Powerful artillery, powerful ranged units on the battlefield. Like, Ikit Claw is better because he has tactical nuclear weapons. But the problem is, for both Ikit Claw and all the Vampire Coast factions, the problem is this, that they have low armor, low leadership units, so their auto-resolve is bad, and then their gunpowder units are not good at the moment because of all the range issues the game has. Like, hopefully the next patch addresses that situation, because range is really crap at the moment. It's bad for the player, it's bad for the AI, but gunpowder units are pointless in any settlement battle, in any siege battle. You can win these battles with your powerful heroes if you're playing the Vampire Coast, but your army is just going to be sitting there AFK. And for a ranged gunpowder faction, your best bet might be to actually go with a full melee roster, like go into the depth guard, get depth guard as quickly as possible in your campaign, and actually use them. They're not great as units, they're expensive, or go with monstrous units if you're playing Cylostra in particular, but you're not using the main armies roster. So that's issues with the Vampire Coast, and it's also issues that Ikit Claw has in his own campaign. But another thing that Cylostra shares with Ikit Claw is they both have a miserable starting position, where their territorial expansion is significantly hampered. Like for Ikit Claw, he basically needs to go to Araby to carve out an empire over there for himself. For Cylostra, she does have territory she can take nearby, but it's going to create a lot more headaches than it's going to solve. So, this is where the problem really kicks in. So, to the north, you have Malekith, Hellebrand, Valkia, and Sigvald. 3 of these are powerful legendary lords. I mean, Malekith's starting situation was weak, but Malekith, when played by the AI, is genuinely a major threat. I mean, Hellebrand herself is also a major threat. Both Malekith and Hellebrand are likely going to declare war on you, and both of them will throw numerous stacks of pretty good troops that will tear your army to shreds if you're not careful. And even if you beat them, congrats! Even if you invade their territory, congratulations, you've just encountered Sigvald and Valkia, who can also tear your army to shreds. Though, against Sigvald and Valkia, at least your gunpowder units will be effective, because they have heavily armored infantry units with little range, so you're not going to be so you can actually do some range damage against them. But still, going up against these four over here is an issue. I mean, Alifanar has that same problem, and he also has Be'lakor. So do you, by the way. You'll also have to deal with Be'lakor if you take all of this territory. Though you don't necessarily need to end up in a war with Alifanar, but you have a minus 40 aversion with him, so it's very likely going to happen, especially if you're playing on Legendary. But the bigger problem for Cylostra, Alifanar has a great army, so although this can be harsh dealing with all of that, he has the tools to do so. He has an effective army, a good economy, all that. You don't have an effective army against the threats you're dealing with to the north. And then there's the issue to the south. While this might not seem a problem early on in the campaign, the early game is not necessarily an issue. But you do have Tyrion and Ilariel to the south posing a major issue as well. And since the High Elves don't particularly like you, once Ilariel and Tyrion have dealt with Noctilus and Akari, they're going to come for you. Oh, you could go north, leave Alifanar in the situation, or wipe Alifanar out, make deals with the Dark Elves. Though they're not going to last, because the Dark Elves themselves have an aversion. It's not a very strong aversion, but it still exists.
Speak whilst you can.
But I guess you could wipe out Karenkar. You could wipe out Alifanar, make a deal with Karenkar to delay the inevitable Dark Elven attack and just go and conquer all of Ulthuan. But doing so is not a great campaign experience. I've done this as Noctilus. I can tell you Ulthuan is a bitch to conquer playing as the Vampire Coast. It's doable, but it isn't a great experience. This is what makes this campaign bad. You have powerful enemies to the north, you have Tarox to the west, you have the Sisters of Twilight to the west as well, and then to the south you have all of Ulthuan, which once they get their things sorted out, they're just going to march Doomstacks. Because what ultimately happens in a campaign is that the Dark Elves and High Elves clash. Guess where you are? You're in the middle of the highway between two of the most powerful empires in the entire campaign map that can spam Doomstacks like there's no tomorrow. Both of them are more powerful than you in their army rosters. Both of them have some of the most powerful legendary lords in the entire game, and both of them hate you. Enjoy this campaign if you do so. It's probably quite an experience. I mean, I've played the campaign in this area as Alifanar. Just this position alone makes this an incredibly difficult experience. It's great to do it as Alifanar. It's not great doing it as Cylostra given the issues the Vampire Coast does have. And Cylostra is the weakest legendary lord for the Vampire Coast. I mean, she does have some decent abilities. She does have this Undead Paladin. She also has an army ability to summon Damdaran Knights, and then you can upgrade it all the way into Questing Knights or Knights of the Realm, if you so desire. She does have power, some level of power, but she is severely outmatched by everyone around her. Not recommend to play this campaign. Number 2, we have Greasus Goldtooth. There's a lot of issues with Ogres currently in Warhammer 3. Their army roster, while decent in a lot of ways, is just not really great and up to the task. On top of that, their economy is incredibly limited because settlements themselves won't generate a lot, so you need to build camps. However, there's a limit to how many camps you can build, and it takes a long time to actually grow the camps. You need a lot of growth points, and you can get a lot of growth, but it's always going to take some time. On top of that, camps are incredibly vulnerable to attack, and if you lose a camp, it's a significant loss for your campaign. On top of that, Greasus himself is completely worthless in battle. He's more of a buffing lord on the campaign map. In battle, his combat ability is just pathetic. Even in battle, his main use is like just buffing your army, giving casualty replenishment, armor, all that kind of stuff. But fighting battles where your legendary lord might just bug out the animation and not even hit anything, or he's the slowest guy in the entire army, is not great. In fact, Greasus should be a fairly effective fighter. I think there's mods that just basically take him out the mount he's using, and he can be effective. The problem, because he does have good stats, but he just doesn't work very well currently in the game. He could be good, but he's not. Then there's other factors beyond the economic issues, the roster issues, the limitations because of camps, and the fact that every settlement that you take is a minor settlement regardless. Beyond that, you are in one of the harshest starting positions in the entire game. To the south, you've got Gorse, the Lich King, as you will. Then you've also got Kugaf, who is going to be gunning for you. And then you've got Clan Rectus. Yes, Tretch Craventel is a genuine threat to Greasus. It might seem laughable, and you would eat Tretch for lunch if it came down to a fight just between you and him, just purely from that. But you're not just fighting Tretch. You're fighting Gorst. You're fighting Kugaf. And then you're fighting Tretch. And then what's even worse, far worse, is to the north you've got Grimgor. By the time you meet Grimgor, like if you could deal with Grimgor within the first few turns, it wouldn't be too much of a problem. You don't get to deal with Grimgor within the first couple of turns in a campaign. The vast majority of times he beats the crap out of Kolak and then conquers the entirety of the northern portions of the Mountains of Morn. He might get to the Bone Road. He certainly will get to the Ancient Giant Lands. And then he's going to throw multiple stacks of troops that are far higher quality than yours at you. He's going to have, and he's not going to stop either. That makes Greasus' campaign situation pure misery to deal with. You don't have the tools to deal with the threats surrounding you. You don't have the army. You don't have the lord for it. And the only benefits, if you will, of this campaign is the fact that you're sitting on a major hub of cafe caravans. Though, depending on how you handle that, if you attack the wrong cafe faction just to get their caravan gold, you might end up in a war with all of Cafe, especially if you piss off Xiao Ming by attacking one of his allies. That can go really ugly, because the last thing you want in this campaign is to end up in a war fighting Cafe at the same time. That would just be the end of it. Like, this campaign is difficult, frustrating, limited, and the Ogres, and that could describe the Ogres in general. I mean, Scrag is in a better position, believe it or not, even if he doesn't have the same kind of campaign benefits. Scrag is in a much better position, but he's still struggling with the situation that the Ogres have. Greasus is stronger overall. He does have better campaign effects, etc., but he's in such a genuinely miserable campaign position that it's really hard to get out of it. And I would not recommend this campaign, especially not on legendary difficulty. I mean, just consider the starting position itself. Like, you start a war with the Cross Clubs, Karakazorn, and the Sons of the Mountain. Okay, the other ogre faction's easy enough, though it's not fun fighting other ogres. But the dwarves who routinely on legendary produce one full stack of highly armored units that your units, because they have low armor piercing like your ogre bulls, aren't effective against, that is a painful experience. And that's just the start until you encounter the main course, which is Gremgor and Gorst coming for you at the same time. Your best bet would probably be to try and take out Gorst and Kugaf early on in campaign before Greasus annihilates you. Before Gremgor comes to annihilate you. And even then, you're still going to have a very difficult fight on your hands. It's a hard campaign, but it's hard in the worst possible ways. Finally, at number 1, as the worst campaign in Total War Warhammer 3, I would have to say it's Settra the Imperishable. It's not the hardest campaign, it's not the campaign for the most broken race, but I would argue that it perfectly illustrates how horrible difficulty design is in this game. And many of the issues that the game does have on enjoyment level in a long campaign. So let me explain how this is. If you're playing Settra, you're probably got one of the hardest campaign starts in the entire game. You do start a war with the Tomb Kings faction. That might sound easy enough, but then you also have Vampire Counts faction. And any Vampire Counts faction is going to produce a lot of units to throw against you. Okay, so you're going to have 20 units to deal with your own 20 units. You can't recruit another army, you need research or a Book of Nagash for that. And then the fun really kicks off. To the south you have Manfred Volkmar. To the west you have Archaon, with whom you start a war with. And then you've got the Berserker, or the Blood Knight, if you will, of Tic-Tac-Toe, who loves to declare war on a lot of factions. You've got Forik, you've got the Bowmen of Orion. And to the north you've got Skarbrand. Not necessarily the biggest threat to deal with, but Skarbrand has a tendency of wiping out, of burning Numas to the ground and being a frustration to deal with. So Scarbrand can be a genuine annoyance. He will generally burn this element once, and you don't have the luxury of just wasting time to try and deal with him early on. You need to keep moving, deal with Manfred, deal with the vampire counts, take all of this territory. It is a very difficult start. Now that might be very enjoyable for a lot of people, but here's the problem. It is a brutal start because of the limitations of the campaign mechanics of the Tomb Kings, but the problem is, and this is something that's shared with every legendary lord that starts in this area, be it Settra, Manfred, Volkmar, Rapance, Archaon. The campaign start might be more difficult than others, but once you get past that, once you've secured all these territories, you're just gonna steamroll everyone. Like once you get 3-4 armies as the Tomb Kings, it doesn't matter who you're playing, you're just steamrolling it. And Settra himself is well suited for this because he can construct buildings faster. He gets growth, so you can get to a higher tier faster, and thus you can get access to better units faster than any other legendary lord of the Tomb Kings. And that's just the faction-wide benefits. He does also have control, which helps with growth as well. And other benefits as well. So Settra has a hard campaign start, but his mid and late game are pathetically easy. And that represents the problem with a lot of campaigns, actually, in Warhammer 3. They might be really difficult in the early game, some more than others, but once you get past the mid game, late game point, they become boring and forgettable and easy. And that's not that doesn't create enjoyable experiences overall. There are few campaigns that don't work like this. Alifanar is the best example of this, but they are few and far between. Settra is, in my mind, the worst example, or rather the best example of bad campaign design currently in the game. A very difficult early game start, then a cakewalk in the mid-late game. Just doesn't lead to a great experience playing as the Tomb Kings. And I think it's showing, like, a lot of people don't care about the Tomb Kings right now in Warhammer 3, as they don't care about certain other factions, like the Ogres, the Demons, even the Warriors of Chaos. People do have issues with all of those factions. A lot of people do have issues with all of those factions and the way they're designed right now. Anyway, that's all I had to say. Costin here, signing out. Don't forget to subscribe, like, enable notifications, and I'll see you next time.